I'm going to just start with giving a quick overview of the nonprofit support program. I really wanted to use a portion of our time, or a good portion of our time, where you can ask questions. Is one of the things that we've learned after we went through the first round of applications is there's a lot of these unique situations that people are curious about, and thought that this type of format might be a little helpful for you. So I'm just quickly going to take you through let's see, I'm just going to try to reduce the size of my screen there. Okay. So a couple of things about this program is, with the unfortunate onset of this pandemic, there has been a lot of different kinds of grant opportunities that have been presented out to nonprofits in the state of Delaware. Dana has been involved with 2 programs as part of our COVID-19 response initiative, which is in partnership with United Way, Philanthropy Delaware, and the Delaware Community Foundation. Those are private donation dollars coming from donors as well as foundations that set up grant making opportunities for Delaware nonprofits. Because the partnership, I'll call it the collaborative, our 4 organizations are involved in this new program that's coming from government dollars. These 2 grant making opportunities are on hold until next year. So the good news is that there will be some additional funding coming out of those programs, but we wanted to make sure we could prioritize getting this funding out. There are a lot of different government, and they're almost all of them are federal sourced grant programs that are available to nonprofits. Some of them are in the loan side of the equation, and some of them are in the grant side of the equation. And in the case of the Paycheck Protection Program, that actually is a loan that can be converted to a grant. This program is really focused on the CARES Act monies that the state of Delaware and that Newcastle County received as a response to COVID-19 from the federal government. And a large portion of the monies, the state of Delaware received over $900 million, and Newcastle County received over $300 million. And those monies were to be used to cover costs and expenses associated with the pandemic. Thanks to your advocacy and that of our partnership with the other 3 organizations, we were convinced our government partners that nonprofits, just like the business community, have been impacted by the pandemic, not only from an expense standpoint, but more importantly in serving and caring for our constituents and stakeholders. And that, having the opportunity to get reimbursed for these unexpected expenses is really important. And they supported us on that. So that's really what this program is. So it is funds that are being deployed from the state of Delaware and Newcastle County for a combined $25 million. And Dana, Philanthropy Delaware, the United Way, and the Community Foundation, we're basically kind of coordinating the application process and the distribution. So this is not a private donation grant as much as it's federal dollars that pass through the local governments that we're then on their behalf helping to distribute. There's 2 parts to the program, which I'll quickly take you through. And we're about ready to open the 2nd round of funding. We purposely made at least 3 rounds of funding available so that agencies that needed a little more time or would prefer to apply only one time, that you have that option to do so. So a little bit about the spirit of the program is that these are federal dollars, and there are very specific guidelines that Congress wrapped around these monies. And so the guidelines of the program are really based upon the state and Newcastle County's interpretation of those federal guidelines. Where there is something that seems a little gray, Dana has been working with the state to get interpretation from the Department of Justice so that we can, again, try to accommodate these various different scenarios. We also want to just make it clear that this is not a competitive process, that this is designed to be open to all eligible nonprofits, and that they can access the funds, and provided they can bring the appropriate substantiation that they need, that they will get reimbursed for those expenses. So a couple of things about these guidelines. As I mentioned, there's 2 different parts, and I'll get into them, but it's for expenses incurred from March 1st through the end of the year. We had hoped that Congress would actually extend the guidelines and allow these expenses to also be covered in 2021. But as of today, that is not taking place. It is uncertain if there will be modifications to this program before the end of the year. We certainly are hopeful, and our national partners are working hard to see if we can get Congress to move on that. To be a beneficiary of this program, the organization is a 501c3 nonprofit incorporated since March 1st. The programs and services are being delivered in Delaware, and the organization cannot be eligible for the Delaware Relief Grants Program, which is a similar program that the Division of Small Business provided, and there's select nonprofit categories that are eligible for that. And so this is kind of a way for the state to say, if you're eligible for one, you can't be eligible for the other, and vice versa. And if you, let's say you received a contract with the state of Delaware specifically to provide a service because of the pandemic, you can't turn around and then get reimbursed for this again. So where you may have received either restricted donations specific to pandemic expense relief or through the government, those particular expenses you can't be reimbursed for. So nonprofits that are not eligible for this program is if they're not a 501c3, hospitals and higher education receive distribution.
John, it looks like you're the host until she gets back. Gotta love our lack of infrastructure for broadband and internet for the state. It defaulted, I guess, John, because you were the first one on, it defaulted to you. Sheila's back, so you're off the hook now, John. Did you hear about the 3 peanuts walking down the street? No, what?
Well, I apologize.
Happens to everyone. One was salted. John, it made John the host. You got to check your chat out later, Sheila. He told us a joke.
Oh, great. That's great. Thank you for hosting there. Let me go back to where I was. I'll stop there and just see if there are any questions before I jump into, or would you prefer I kind of walk you through the program and then work on getting questions? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and keep going then. So I think I covered that portion. All right, the other piece that was built into this program, and this is again to be—
Sheila, will you back up like 1 or 2 slides? Because let's see, I think that was the one that we lost you on. You were just starting to talk about this slide.
Okay, thank you. So these are the categories of nonprofits because they are eligible for other portions of CARES Act money or have already received a sizable distribution. For example, hospitals and higher ed receive funding. They're not eligible for this program. Same with arts, cultural, historical societies, they are eligible for the program that the Division of Small Business is managing. And then veterans, first responders also have special programs that were created by the state. And then education organizations are eligible for Part 1. So again, we tried to cast this as wide as possible so that no nonprofit falls through the cracks. So if for some reason you don't think you're eligible, that's something you can chat with me offline, and we'll be happy to help. There is also, right now, there's caps on the amount of funding that a nonprofit can receive. And this was designed primarily to ensure that there was available funds for everybody who would like to get reimbursed. If we get into the third round and we find that there's more funding available, or which we keep asking for, if the government wants to give more funding to this, these caps might change. But for now, this is how the program is set up. And a nonprofit can apply, for those who can, apply for Part 1 and Part 2. You can get funding from both. It's not that you only could get one part or the other. But for the larger nonprofits, there's a cap of that combined value of up to 100,000. So 5 million nonprofits that are in that 5 million plus operating budget, the max that they could get from both parts combined is 100,000. Again, just because these are federal dollars and the federal guidelines are pretty specific, we just want to make sure nonprofits understand that if they, for example, received a check to buy food from the local grocery store, they can't turn around and put those specific receipts into this program because they've already been reimbursed. Same with contracts or other types of programs. It doesn't mean, though, that if you received a grant to help you in the times of COVID-19, you as a nonprofit can apply that money however you might see fit, and you might apply that money to something that is not covered in this program. And then you'd have those the ability to get reimbursed for those other parts. So this is where there's a little bit of an honor system. A nonprofit will be asked to attest that they haven't been reimbursed for these expenses in another way. And part of the coordination that is happening is with Newcastle County and the state and the organizations, just to make sure that we don't want to have a situation where a nonprofit down the road gets audited and find out that you know, there was that error. So we are, as Dana, we are here to help you sort through those kinds of questions. So please know that even after this session, if you have other questions, we have folks available who can work with you from answering questions all the way to assisting you complete your application. So Part 1 is a pretty straightforward reimbursement program. And these are for expenses incurred because of COVID-19 that impacted your operations. And I'm really proud of the fact that originally when we started this conversation with the state, it was just to get reimbursed for PPE. And since then, we've been able to really branch this out. So if you're a nonprofit that had to purchase laptops for your employees so they could work remotely, you had to hire a advanced cleaning system because to ensure that your air is circulating the right way, or you have people coming in at night completely, you know, disinfecting your place that you never had before. Certainly PPE, Zoom licenses. Some nonprofits had to change or adjust their website so that they could engage with their clients in a different way. All of those are unanticipated costs that happen because of COVID-19 and therefore can be reimbursed in this program. The federal government has created specific guidelines and categories, which all of these are examples that fall into. And when you complete the form that you list your expenses, they just ask you to document which one of these things there is. I will say in Part 1, if you were a nonprofit that received dollars from the Paycheck Protection Program, that PPP loan, you're not eligible to use staff expenses in Part 1. So I know that's unfortunate because in many cases we all have incurred higher staff expenses, but not necessarily have the revenue to offset that. But unfortunately, that's one of the criteria. So part one is a pretty straightforward process. And I should also say that the application for this program is one application. So if you only complete the top section once, and then if you apply for part one, you can, or you apply for part two, or you can apply for both. So we tried to make this really simple. For part one, you would need to show or indicate your 501c3 date of issuance, the dollar value of your 2019 operating budget. For classification purposes, they do ask you to share what code you are, and that's there's a link that you can go there, and it's very simple. Your most recent IRS tax filing, if you're a newer nonprofit, a faith-based organization, or one that has a fiscal sponsor, and you don't have an actual 990 that you can submit, they are accepting the 2019-2020 operating budgets to use as a reference. If a nonprofit has an audit, that's helpful. And then receipts. So in the application, you will receive, simple kind of fill out the boxes, but then you do need to upload two things for part one. The first is a Excel spreadsheet that has you complete and fill out the expenses by those different categories, and then your corresponding receipts. And it's important that the total dollars that you have on that Excel spreadsheet matches the receipts that you submit, and that matches the total dollar amount that you're requesting on the application. So the Excel spreadsheet, we have samples of that on the website decaresfunds.org. There's also a tutorial on how to complete the Excel spreadsheet, or if you would like assistance, we've even helped nonprofits condense all their PDFs into one file, because not everybody has Adobe Pro. So whatever you need help on, we will help you, because we don't want you to not get access to these funds. There are some things that are not eligible for part one that you can see listed here. Unfortunately, we can't get reimbursed for lost revenue. I already mentioned about salaries in the Paycheck Protection Program. If you were donated items, you can't then turn around and ask to get reimbursed for those items either. If you received insurance or have some type of insurance and you were reimbursed with insurance, you can't then put those expenses towards there. So a lot of these are pretty much the same kind of story about what's not eligible. We have had some questions about capital improvement projects. You'll have to show why that capital improvement was required because of COVID. And so an example could be having to purchase laptops, that's capital. Having to purchase the poly, the dividers, so that when people are working there, there's these guards are in place. So those could be examples, but if you were planning a capital campaign and you were hoping that you could get some funding to support that capital campaign, that won't work for this program. So part one is purely, think about it as operational expenses incurred because of COVID-19 and getting reimbursed for it. There's a second part, and this is around helping nonprofits who had increased service levels or increased costs in service to do their programming because of COVID-19. And I recognize it's a little gray, but this was the best that we can do. So there's this, the government is requiring you to document how you had that increase in cost due to increased services caseload. You'll need to, again, think about it in the context of the March 1st to December 30th. In this program, because there are some nonprofits that are serving at a higher level of service demand than they were planning, and it's going to be through the year, they can actually request and say, we expect that we're going to spend this in, and actually I haven't changed the slide, it'll be November, December, and the grant award will be for the whole year, and then the portion for November, December, you get reimbursed later. For this grant, there is a review committee comprised of the state, the county, our 4 organizations, and then representatives from the different counties. And this is not a review committee to decide who gets a grant. It's more of a compliance committee. And we just had our meeting for the first round of applications earlier this week. And what we discussed were areas where we were seeing the kinds of expenses nonprofits were submitting, where there were some nonprofits that submitted and were denied, and why they were denied. There were some other questions that came up that give us an opportunity to ask the state to think about possible evolution of the program for round 3. So that's really the purpose of that committee. Once those applications have been reviewed by the committee, the state has to do a final kind of stamp of approval, and then the funding goes out. So the recognition for part 2 is that these are identifying organizations that may have had serve populations that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And these organizations did not have in their budgets the funding to try to support these individuals. And so this is a way to kind of help them with that portion of their increased costs. So you'll see that there's quite a range of eligible services. Again, we did our best to try to stretch it as much as we can, but it is recognized that part 2 is not going to be applicable to every nonprofit organization. But we did, this is like a drop-down box so that you would actually check what services is. You know, is this about substance abuse? This is about, you know, medical services, whatever that might be. For part 2, similar to part 1, again, it's the same application if you're applying for both. So a lot of the front information is the same. There is, though, a need to describe your services, how you measure levels. So remember, this is about increased. And then how you document those levels of increase and then the expenses that go with it. So in part 2, there's 2 Excel spreadsheets. The first Excel spreadsheet is asking you to share what your typical level of service outputs. So for some of you, it might be number of people served. For some, it could be caseload. For some of you, it could be hours, however you measure service outputs. And then show what did you have in 2019? What did you expect in 2020? And where did you end up? And then what are the corresponding expenses associated with that? If you had a decline in serving the number of people, unfortunately, this program, this part 2 is not, it's going to be really hard to justify how you could qualify for part 2. But we have confirmed that if you are serving a set population and your cost to serve that population increased, that can be covered, because in order for you to continue to serve them, you had to increase your costs. And again, that comes back to, for some nonprofits, they started providing food to a population that they normally wouldn't have to feed because, let's say, the kids are in school typically. So those are different examples. So I'm going to give you a kind of walk you through a scenario just to kind of help you. So this particular nonprofit provided meals at their locations. So maybe they're like a residential nonprofit, maybe they're a soup kitchen or a senior center, for example. And so they're going to be asked, what are the services that you provide and how they've increased? And so this nonprofit would say, well, with the pandemic, we had to switch from people eating inside to carry out meals. And we had to then also deliver the meals to these clients. And so how do you measure that? Well, we measure it by the number of meals. Typically, we might have this many meals when people come to our location. Now we're going to have to make this many meals. And on top of it, we have the mileage. So then you would show the difference between what you used to do pre-pandemic and what you're having to do today, and those increases, and then provide the costs associated with that. In part 2, which is good news for some organizations, you can include personnel expenses if they were not covered by that Paycheck Protection Loan. And the reason why is we've heard that some nonprofits had to use paid staff or contract individuals to do work that volunteers used to do. And so that becomes an incremental cost to deliver services that they would not otherwise would have budgeted for the 2020 year. And again, a reminder that this is reimbursements for expenses incurred between March and October in this way. And if it is anticipated the nonprofit is going to continue to have those expenses, you can project it out so that the nonprofit gets a grant award that includes current and future, and then they would get reimbursed for what they've already spent. And then in 2021, they would get reimbursed for the balance of the year's expenses. Couple of things that come up in round one to just really keep in mind is to be as clear as possible about the expenses and why they are relevant. The reviewers are pretty much accountants, so they're not going to know your business per se. Don't use alphabet language to describe what you're doing. Be very clear, so as if somebody who's never heard of you before would understand what you were trying to do. For part one, you do need to have your receipts, and it's good for you if they're in the exact same order as you put them on the Excel spreadsheet. They do require one PDF for those receipts. So again, if you need help with that or need help condensing it, because some of the upload capacity of the application is, I think it's set at like, I don't know, 25, 32 megabytes. And we found out in part one that some folks were loading really large files. So we can help with that condensing. Make sure that the expenses that you're putting on the Excel spreadsheet are those that are eligible, and they match what can qualify, and they match the receipts you have and the total that you have on the application. I highlighted this because that was really where some nonprofits in the first round got into trouble. Their math didn't work. They were asking for, I'll make this number up, $4,500, but then the receipts they submitted were for $4,200, and the schedule that they had was for $5,500. So that creates a situation where the folks that are reviewing this can't reconcile it, and they're not going to try. They're going to send it back, and you might miss the window. So this is, again, where Dana can help, is we're happy to review and look at your schedules. Sometimes an extra set of eyes can catch something that you might not see, and help make sure you can be successful. So we do have a website called decaresfunds.org that has a lot of FAQs. As I said, it's got the sample templates. It has a tutorial, it has the application, so you can look at all of that before you submit. And we are also happy to help you with however you need help. If it's just answering a question, or all the way to, as I said, assistance in getting those schedules completed. So there's a variety of different players, and just wanted to kind of wrap up with who's doing what. So you have the state and Newcastle County that created the parameters of the program. And then United Way and the Community Foundation are processing the applications. Since they already have that set up in their systems, they can do that work. Philanthropy Delaware is compiling all of the information that is used then for the review committee and for the state to put their stamp on to say, yes, go ahead and distribute the funds. And then our role is we're serving as kind of a liaison with the government to make sure that we've got one line of communication. We are also serving as the primary communicator to the nonprofits, and then we're providing technical assistance. So please don't contact the Community Foundation or the United Way asking them questions about the grant application. They really are not set up to do that. We are the ones that have those technical assistance available. And again, it's really easy. You can email at decaresfunds@delawarenonprofit.org, or go to the website and there's a contact us button, and either way we can connect you. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions, and hopefully I can answer them. There is one here that is in the chat that I'll go ahead and just read real quickly. Could you confirm the time period for the round 2 funding? It begins November 9th and runs till November 20th. And the second question is, if we applied in round 1 for part 1 reimbursements, Can we submit additional eligible Part 1 reimbursements or maybe submit Part 2? We requested that nonprofits who applied in round 1 will wait until round 3. If for some reason your application was sent back because it wasn't complete, you can apply in round 2. But otherwise, again, thinking about ensuring that nonprofits can access these funds, we do want to make sure that that they're available. Let's see, here's another question. There were funding limits on an earlier slide. Was the limit posted a combined limit for Part 1 and 2, or is that a limit for each part? The figures are a limit for each part. So a small nonprofit under 100,000 could apply for up to 5,000 in Part 1 and can apply for up to 5,000 in Part 2 for a total of $10,000. Conversely, the $5 million sized and up nonprofits can apply for 75,000 in Part 1, but because there's a cap of 100,000 per organization, they can only apply for 25,000 for Part 2, for example. Should we apply for more than the limit or keep our application purposely below the limit? If you have expenses that go all the way up to the cap, I say submit them. What the request has been from the first round that we saw is make sure that the totals you're putting, the receipts you're putting in, and the amount you're asking all tie together so that the folks who are reviewing things don't have to guess about that. If we submitted in round 1, should we have heard by now? So here's what's happened. We just had the review meeting on Monday, and there were a couple of applications that needed to get some clarity on. The state will receive the list of all of the applications, and then you should be notified. Our hope is that nonprofits will be notified of what they were eligible for by the end of this week, and then the funds would be distributed next week. Since this was our first time, I think it went a little slower. And my hope is that for round 2, we'll be able to turn things around a little bit more quickly now that we've been through the process once before. So those are the questions. I'm going to stop there for a second. We've got 2 folks on the phone, so I'm going to see if those of you on the phone have any questions.
No, I think it's pretty clear. I really can't think of anything right now, but it's good to know that Dana is available if we do have any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And the other person on the phone?
Hi, this is Anthea Piscaric from the Ministry of Caring. I'm sorry, I got in late. I had a meeting prior to this. So I missed the first part of the presentation, and I just heard the tail end of the last question of if you have received funding from the first part or have, then you can't apply for the whole 100,000. And this is just to confirm, and I apologize if that you've already been through all of this, but it is a reimbursable. It's for any expenses that already have been paid out, and the CARES Act will reimburse it through this process.
Yes, for eligible expenses, you do need to submit receipts, not invoices. Right. And they will ask you, for Part 1, you're asked to confirm how you paid for it, whether it was by check or credit card. So that, again, is a way for them to kind of look and verify. I'll say that for Part 2, right now, the state is not requesting any substantiation with receipts, though you do have the option to submit them. We just ask and strongly suggest that you keep those receipts in case you do get audited down the road. Excuse me.
Sure. Yeah, under that banner of it being a reimbursable. Will you consider any dental equipment, like large dental equipment for this sort of reimbursement?
I think the question would be, why did you have to purchase that equipment? And is it specifically because of COVID? And were you not planning to purchase it? That would be the way to think about those questions.
Yes, so this is something that was brought up by our dentist that's COVID related. So, yeah.
If you'd like, you could reach out to us offline and we could get that specific question answered for you. And if you do that now, we can try to get it answered for you before the application opens up. In the chat box, there's also a question about in-kind expenses. in-kind expenses become donation, are in essence donations. So you don't have any receipts for them. So that means you can't really get reimbursed for them. And again, a reminder that we did record this. I'm not sure how what happens when I jumped off and come back on, but I see it's still recording. So for those of you who would like to get this recording, we can email it to you, and I can also email the PowerPoint so that you have all of the information there.
Do you want us to send a request for that directly, or just email in the chat? How you want us to get that information?
Well, if you've registered, we have your registrations, your email address, so we can just
Great.
Email it out to those who registered.
Great, thank you.
Sheila,
Yeah,
this
that's
is
something
Beth.
that I would really like, Sheila, is the PowerPoint.
Yes, I'll make sure that everybody gets the PowerPoint. And the
Okay, great. Okay.
Bev, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut the other person off. Can you elaborate a little bit on, you made a statement early in the presentation about the programs and services have to operate in Delaware. Our agency is based in Delaware. We have workers in Delaware, but our clients are all over the country.
So yeah, so you would somehow need to show that it's just for the clients that are in Delaware.
So, but if we had expenses so that our workers could needed to work from home, you know, they could be serving clients.
I see what you're saying. So Bev, can you send me an email separately and we'll get that also?
Sure.
confirmed.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah. And my email address, I'll put it in the chat box, is sbravo at, actually, let me do this. I'm going to send it to DECares at Delaware Nonprofit, because I get so many emails that it can possibly get lost, but we have staff that are dedicated to getting this email. So that way I'll make sure that we can get that up to the state to get that clarified. Other questions? Let's make sure I didn't miss anything. So here's a question. Our organization's 2019 budget has significant in-kind expenses. Yeah, so again, I'm not sure. In-kind expenses means that you didn't pay anybody, so you don't have a receipt. So unless you have a receipt that you actually spent money on it, those particular expenses cannot be reimbursed. So for example, if you had to hire I'll just make this up, an accountant because of transactions related to COVID, and that accountant donated their services, that in essence is donated, it's donations towards that particular expense. You can't then get reimbursed for that expense. That makes sense.
I have a question. We had a question about receipts. For example, and I'm just going to use the most simple one that would hit everyone here. A rabbi had to run out and buy a bunch of things to clean up something, and it was very COVID related, of getting the wipes and whatever for an event. And he went to CVS. So we as an organization paid him for the charge on his credit card, but we don't have the CVS receipt. My question is, are credit card receipts, the credit card bill, adequate, or do we have to go back and get a CVS printout kind of thing for our receipt listings?
I haven't been asked that question specifically. I mean, that to me is like a volunteer that drives miles, right? And the volunteer, you weren't expecting to have to pay for 500 miles of travel, because you usually would only have to do 200, and the mileage that you paid the volunteer could be reimbursed. So I would think that is an example. If you send that also as a question, we can make sure we find out because that would really be on the United Way side, and well, DCF too, just to verify that as long as you have the credit card statement that shows, like you're saying that they used your company credit card?
No, he used his personal credit card and bought the stuff, and then we reimbursed him on his personal credit card. But
But you have some documentation from him that shows he made
that purchase and what it was for, you know, that he got this and this and this. Yeah.
I think that should work.
Okay.
Because that would be like an employee submitting for, yeah.
Well, the
So I
rabbi
think
is an employee.
I'm
He is-
sorry?
The rabbi is an employee. He just used his personal credit card as opposed to the company credit card because.
Yeah, I would think that works, but we can double check that for you.
Okay.
So my question was about what qualifies the organization for the different breakdowns. Like if you're a very small organization, you can apply for $5,000, but if you're a $100,000 organization, you can apply for $10,000 for the part 1 and part 2. And the organization didn't, it had a executive director who was unpaid. So that person, like the whole budget adds up to over $100,000, but the actual, there was a lot of in-kind donations that led to that being.
I see what you're saying, that you've benefited from a lot of donations. They just happen to be in-kind donations. And then you have the expenses. So this is about the size of your operating budget?
Yes.
Okay. When you present a budget to other foundations and donors, do you show it as that bigger size organization, or do you reflect it as a smaller organization?
The budget is, shows the larger size of the organization, just because it's, it was a significant thing that the executive director was able to work without being paid.
Right. So in essence, you would have had, if that executive director is being paid, but they're donating their time, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I would think so. If you have a budget that you reflect the bigger size and that's what you've been using, that they would probably accept that. But again, we have no trouble going and asking those questions to make sure you get the answers you need so that you're sure. So please feel free to, and again, because I'm presenting right now, I'm not writing these questions down. So please either send me an email or send it to decaresfunds@delawarenonprofit.org so we can get those responses for you.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Let's see something in the chat here. Well, the good news is it's November 4th and the application for round 2 starts on November 9th. So there is time for us to help get you those questions, and there's 2 weeks for the applications to come in. I will tell you that the first round, there's still lots of money left, so the money's not going to run out. Better that you have a complete application and it gets in than to try to rush it and then find out that something isn't working. So again, I do encourage you to make sure that you have somebody take a look at it. We had a situation where a nonprofit misspelled some things, and because of that, when you read it, it was interpreted differently. And one of our reviewers caught that and was able to give some coaching so that the narrative that they were using made sense, again, to those reviewers who may not know anything about your particular nonprofit, the business that you do.
Sheila, I have another question.
Sure.
First, I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. Did you say before that if we submitted in part 1, you do not want us to submit again in round 2?
Correct. Part 1, the request was that you submit that in round 3.
Okay, so I had somehow thought that we could submit for part 2 in round 2. That's not the case. If we submitted in part 1, you want us to hold until part 3.
So we phrased it as if you submitted an application in round 1, we ask you to hold until round 3. Send me an email about that and I'll get clarity, because I believe we were talking about it from an application standpoint, but I'm happy to make sure we understand that and can let you know.
Great, thank you.
These are all really good questions, and I'm sorry I don't have the specific answers, but again, that's why I wanted to hold this to find out what questions you guys might still have so we can try to get them for you, the answers for you. Any other questions? Great. Well then, that's all I had to offer. Again, please, don't feel like your question's stupid. You know, we're happy to answer them. And in some cases, if like today, I don't have all the specific answers yet, but we're happy to go get them. And just really excited that we can help get some more needed dollars to the organizations that you run, and to help support the services that that so positively impact our community. So thank you.